Great. Well, good evening, good morning, everybody, and welcome to our 11th planning group for New Zealand. I'd also like to acknowledge before we get started, it's been a big week for Aotearoa New Zealand. Since we last met, we lost our Kingi Tuheitia, our Māori king, and farewelled him, and have a new Māori queen, Ngā Wai Hono I Te Pō. And for us who were in Auckland, it was really beautiful because the announcement of her appointment to that role came through as we were sitting under the carvings in the marae. So it felt really, really special. And yeah, I'm sure every one of us who's here in Aotearoa has had kind of experiences to do with that this week. So we'll be holding that in mind as we talk. I wanted to start with these words, even though these are kind of ka whawhai tono mātou, a struggle without end. These seem like quite feisty words, but and the reason for that is because the context that we're going to be exploring for key 11 in New Zealand is very much to do with these words. But I certainly felt that the time that we had and the time around the country's response to this transition that we've just been through, it felt like a pause, didn't it? From a pause from some political nastiness and some other struggles that have been going on in Aotearoa. So it's kind of been a big week, hasn't it? Does anybody else want to speak to that?
Yeah, I will. I just found it so moving. We didn't go to Turinga Waiwai, but I was listening to it in the traffic on the radio, and the commentators, I don't know what you call them, radio people. It was just the fact that we had 4 women that were broadcasting it, and the way that they actually covered it. It was so moving. I was just in tears. I just thought it was just, and then you watched it on the news. It was just incredible. Yeah, I'm really proud to be a New Zealander and having, Māoridom, being bringing Te Reo alive. And yeah, it was an incredible event. I agree. Thanks.
Thank you, Robin. Yeah, so to give you a little bit of context, Tim, tens of thousands of people went to the funeral and were hosted, and everybody would have been fed and everybody was welcome. And I didn't attend myself because, as I mentioned, I was up in Auckland, but lots of people did, and it was pretty cool. It's a pretty amazing experience to have happen in your lifetime. So yeah. So for tonight, I just wanted to mention something about timing. So for someone's written something in the chat. Oh, Daphne's popped off. She'll be back shortly. So what Tim and I thought we might do is we'd like to try and keep the time to an hour, because that's what we've said we'd do, and we completely understand if people need to go. But what we'll probably do is, if we run over time, what we've been doing is we'll keep going because we're making the recording. So if you need to drop away, don't feel bad about that. We'll give it the time that we need, but we won't go. We'll try not to go too far over time. So don't feel bad about dropping away. That's all I wanted to say. So any reflections or stories before we get going and have a look at this key 11? Robin, you thought you might be bringing something to talk about.
Oh, yes, I did try it, but yeah, look, it was just fantastic. Actually, it was at a school I was relieving in Koru, so that's Mangere. That's that's what was the name of the Richardson Road. Actually, what's happened is that I took a few jobs when I was away, thought that I could do a few, and then I got this 10-day relieving gig. So I thought, well, I'll try it in the school, and then I'm going to try it again when I go back to this other school that I've got the 10 days in on Thursday. So I was wanting to do the images, but it turned out to be, because I was on the call with Kylie, you know, she had the Auckland thing, and she said, I think it's better suited in, was it Make a Settlement? Was it a Make a
Okay, so you gave that one a go.
So I kind of combined them. So
Okay.
basically what look, it went well, and I think I can see some really big errors, and I'd be happy to be contributed to. So basically I had an island in the middle, you know me, but the island thing happened. So I said to the young ones, I said, look, you know, there's been a big earthquake, and just out of the blue, this island has come up. And I found something on the internet, and it had a picture of the latest island actually in the world that's come up, like a volcanic island. So I showed the picture, and I said, the thing about this island is that, you know, no one was allowed to go on it, but they did put the drones over the top, and they had a look at it, and they realized that we had to really look at settlements way back in order before to go on. I mean, it looks pretty intact from the drones, and there's some artifacts and things, but before we go on, we really have to see where they might have settled, where they might have had their fortification, and all their different places that make up the village. And, you know, it was sustainable, and I don't know what I said, but anyway, I got these photos off the internet of all these different village things that happened before pre-European, and I laid them all out, and I said, all right, so here are some stickies, and I had a big sheet, a big green sheet, and I said, all right, and I had some rope, so I said that there was a and they stuffed all the newspaper underneath to get the contours, and they came up with the factors, put it in the middle, a big mountain in the middle, and then I got some string, didn't quite have it long enough, but anyway, the Blue River, and I said, well, do you think, the one thing that I do know is that they had to have a river, so because, you know, they didn't settle on an island if there was no river, so they did have a river, did have a stream, and what was the shape of it, they put the shape of it in. And then they went through all the photos, and they had these stickies, and they just went back to the island, and they put all the stickies on, and then they talked about it, where that's as far as we got. I wasn't sure how well it went. What I realized now, what I could have done was group them up and said, okay, you're going to do the potter, you're going to do the storehouse, you're going to do where they think the meeting house was, and you do the fortification, because they were all going everywhere. But they got so busy. It was so good. And at the end, I didn't realize how good it was until the end. And at the end, I did this reflection, and I said, well, and I was a bit funny. I said, well, you know, because it's the first time at the school. And I said, well, look, you know, I'm not sure whether, you know, you want me back. It was pretty hard work, actually, because they were, you know, kids
Full
were
on.
pretty, it was full on, and they were all sort of over the place and everything. But I said, well, look, I'm not sure whether you want me back, and, you know, might not. Anyway, all of a sudden, they said, oh, I really like your style, miss.
Oh.
I said, what about the style? I said, oh, I love the island. I thought that was just the most fabulous thing, you know, and I just loved thinking about where we were going to put, you know, the Coomera pit, where we were going to put the fortification. So look, there was something that worked about it, but at the same time, I can see how you can get better at it. And I think when on my own reflection, I could have just said, all right, well, you guys, you work out where you think that goes and why, and then come back and discuss it. At the moment, they just all put a whole lot of different things everywhere. I mean, they got busy, but it wasn't great. And that was it. So it was sort of an hour activity.
It sounds like you were really brave to do that in a new school with a new group of children. And you could also feel how the letting go of the usual classroom management felt kind of loose, and it doesn't give you the usual data on whether it's succeeding or not. But if children are coming back to you and saying, I like your style, miss, they're giving you a different kind of feedback. So well done. And yeah, there's always better we can do, but the main thing is getting brave and giving things a go. So congratulations. I think that's great. I hope you'll send through some of the writing and that kind of thing when it develops.
Well, I won't go back there, but I will with the news. That was sort of a template. But what I will say is that congratulations to you and Tim, because obviously I followed the format, you know, like pretty much, and I could see the mistake I made, but and they just said it's just such a good way of teaching, you know, because I asked her, then another kid came up and said, I said, what do you mean by style? Said, well, it's different. I like something new. You know, they didn't want the format of usual, you know. So yeah, it was, I thought it was really, it was easy, because I know it was quite brave of me to do that, but at the same time it's laid out quite clearly, and so I just followed. Yeah, it was really good.
Thanks for that, Robin. It's always great to get those stories from the field, and I love those canny kids who say, "Hey, you're doing something different. Keep it up."
Yeah, that's what I said.
Neat. That's neat.
And we want you back. So I thought that was nice.
Yay! We'll take that. All right. So, thanks for sharing that story. Let's crack on with. Let's have a look at key 11. And I'm going to pop this up, and I'm going to confess to you that this is a key, or this particular example that I've wrote around this key, which is Bastion Point, or Takaparafa, which is the Māori name for that part of the world. It's an example that I feel some heaviness and some uncertainty about, and some kind of hesitant feelings about, because it's a piece of New Zealand history that is still so current and so painful for so many people. It's one that I only know a little bit about myself, and so I'm sure others will have felt these kind of feelings too, that when you you're so, I feel so it's so important to be respectful and to do things right by people and by events, that sometimes I feel almost that I should avoid certain topics, or teach certain topics, not teach certain topics. And then on the other hand, I know that as a country we've done that for years, and the New Zealand curriculum is an encouragement to all of us, in fact a requirement to us, to teach stories, including some of our painful stories. So this particular example that was created for key 11 was one that really evolved a lot, had a lot of input from our cultural mentor, and is still evolving, actually, in my mind. So what I've done quite a lot of thinking about how to bring this to you tonight. And I think what I'd like to do is just kind of sit with that idea of evolving understandings, and perhaps talk through how the key evolved, and the kinds of decisions we made, perhaps a little more than demonstrating it. Because I'm not even sure that right now today I would do this key the way that it was written. Such has been my kind of evolving understanding. So let me kind of explain that as we go. So I'm kind of going to talk through the key perhaps more than we usually do, because normally we would just demonstrate it, and perhaps as I do that, it might help to explain it. So in this example, Bastion Point, the key is written, if you look at it in the book, it's written assuming that children know a little bit about what's been happening there, what happened there in history. So can I ask what people here present know about this piece of New Zealand history? I'm really conscious people have different relationships to it. There might be people here who would have been directly affected by what happened there. So I just wanted to hear what your knowledge and take on this piece of history is. Anyone?
Well, I know that they held out, so it was a real stand hold, or whatever you call it, for a long time, and the Maori actually won in the end to have that claimed as their piece of, you know, they wanted to build on it and all the rest of it, and they defended it, and there was a whole lot of riots and the rest of it. I can't quite remember.
So it's a story. So to summarize what you're saying, Robin, it's a story of holding out. It's a story of a piece of precious land, a whole lot of you say riots, a whole lot of people standing up, and some violence that involved, and a sense of the Māori who occupied this land getting a sense of validity for their views later on. Is that what you're saying?
Well, it's a magnificent piece of land too. It actually looked out on the Hauraki Gulf, so it had absolute Maori heritage to it. And but it was that they wanted to, Europeanize it and whatever they wanted to do, didn't they? And then the Maori said, no, we want to hold on to it. And yeah, I think it did. It was gifted. I think it was gifted to the Auckland City Council as a reserve in the end. So it wasn't gifted back to the Maori, I don't think. I think that's what happened.
So there's still an ongoing conversation about ownership, but I think you'll find that there's very clear. It's very clearly Ngāti Whātua land on that point.
Yeah.
So yeah, anybody else want to build on that?
I think that it was one of the first times that Maori had really publicly stood up and said, you actually can't take this, this is ours. Because a lot of the times in the past, the land has gone and slid sideways because, again, there was no particular owner, it was common land and it could slip sideways. But this was a total agreement by a people to say, don't take this, ours. And that really hurt the government. They had not been, or they'd not had to deal with that before.
So this was a real turning point moment, a whole coming together. And as you're saying, perhaps the first time the government had to face such strong resistance and such a long resistance. So this is a piece of land, Tim, that's in Auckland, some of the poshest real estate in the country, right up to the edges of it. And it in 1977 it was occupied by its owners for 506 days because the developers were moving in to start to build even more flash houses on it.
And 62.
What's that? Sorry, Robin?
60 acres.
60 acres, right.
Yeah.
And it was, and what I'm going to commend you to all of you, and I really hope you will find it, is this this documentary called Bastion Point, The Untold Story. I've just rewatched it again this afternoon, and what it gets across is, and we'll watch, I've chosen some tiny little bits of it for us to watch in a minute. What it gets across is the complexity of the situation, but also one of the things the documentary does, which I think drama tries to do, is it gives lots of people voices. So we hear from the police commissioner who was asked to go in and felt really mixed about it with his troops, and we hear from different people involved in the situation. But yeah, so we've got the idea of a piece of precious land. We've got the idea of people occupying that land, and we've got the idea of this being a real turning point moment. And I think when you watch the documentary, you'll agree that it was a whole lot of streams coming together at the same point. So this was around the time of in the 70s, other big political movements in Aotearoa, New Zealand, that really fed into this one. So, so the key. Oh, is it okay if I move on to the key, or if you know that there's going to be little bits of video coming, or is there something more that you want to say, or someone else wanting to speak to their knowledge of the history? Okay. I will. The key suggests that we start with this image. So it won't surprise you to know that this is that piece of land that has been the home for well, thousands of years to the Ngāti Whātua people, but more particularly has been a temporary home for some 500 days of occupation. And you can see some buildings there in the centre. What else can we see in this image?
Lots of vehicles, and especially things like a big bus.
Where's the big bus?
On the right-hand side of the image. There are a lot of vehicles. There are several cars and a small bus, but there's what looks like a decent-sized bus.
You'd need a decent-sized bus to bring in hundreds of troops, wouldn't you?
Yes.
And is that the police around the outside, is it?
It is. It's from all over the country. And the other thing the buses were used for was to take the occupiers away, to evict them and take them away. So I'm going to probably hurry us a little bit more than you would with children. I think in our previous sessions, you've learned how we tend to take time over these images and really sit with them and really notice things. But yeah, some 222 people, I think it was, taken away. And what I'm going to show you next is the the TV coverage of that moment where people were taken away. Can you see this writing here? So this is online, a piece of TV coverage of the Bastion Point eviction. And when I've played it for you, I'm going to remind me to tell you something about how even this has evolved. So let me know if you can see this. No, stop it. I'll just stop sharing for a second and sort that out. It was playing for me before. Okay. I'm going to screen share to my other screen so you can see that one. Can you see that okay?
While Bastion Point was sleeping this morning, the police were on the move. They came in army trucks from the Air Force and Navy barracks they'd occupied overnight. A massive series of convoys that looked more like a scene from a World War II movie than a police action against Maori protesters. As soon as the convoys were sighted, flares were set off on Bastion Point, and the 300 people on the land headed for their meeting house. Then the police arrived and started marching onto the land, a total force of more than 500.
So it's a very brief part there. Any responses to what we just saw?
The number of police make it feel to me very aggressive.
Yeah, it was at least one. My understanding is at least one person in the police for residents on the point. So that's, and they were recruited from all over the country.
And you're getting a third perspective there. So you see, got the perspective of the protesters, the police arriving, but now the voice gives you third perspective. So I was quite interested in listening to the language and the references to the Second World War and the militaristic kind of dimension to it. Yeah, we definitely got the impression that it was going to be very aggressive.
Yeah, it kind of gives you a pressure in the chest feeling, doesn't it? Like even seeing those images at this distance, it's like it's building up. And I thought it was interesting, Tim, that the commentator is the journalist is saying, "Whoa, this looks more like a military campaign than an action to remove some protesters."
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah.
Anyone else?
It sort of gives you the air that haven't seen this before, unprecedented. So it's kind of like, that's coming from there, there's sort of like an anticipation about that you don't know what's going to happen next.
Just imagine that for a minute, those of us who live in Aotearoa. Imagine Auckland streets being full of military vehicles, full of police officers from all over the country descending on people. It's a scary thing. It's a really scary idea to me. And I wanted to tell you something about how this little piece of footage has evolved, because even between the time that this was put online and today, when we originally wrote the book and we linked to this, it was entitled The Bastion Point Protest, and it's now been changed to the Bastion Point Eviction. And a certain part of the footage that was included on the clip has been removed from the end. So I take this to mean that even the way that people who are involved in preserving the past want that to be remembered, even the language they want used is evolving, because there's a difference, isn't there, between a protest and it being called a protest and it being called an eviction. There's a difference between something being called an occupation and a protest, and so this is what I mean about having some hesitancy about this, because I think this is a really evolving, complex story that's still being told, and some of the language could inadvertently, some of the language we might use could inadvertently, trigger strong feelings in people.
Yeah, and have they got this in the Auckland Museum? I think they've got a big, was that, I think they've got this whole Bastion Point. I don't know, they've got an exhibit in there somewhere. Have you seen that, Vivian?
One would hope so.
Yeah, but it's quite a good coverage, is my point.
But this takes me to the questions I've been asking myself about how we teach history, when we teach history, and who teaches history. So that I think it's one thing for a teacher in a classroom to be dealing with this history, because you are that group of children's mediator to New Zealand. It's different again for me to come on here and talk to a bunch of teachers about history. What would feel right for me would be to have someone from Ngāti Whātua to kind of represent that story, because it's their story. So I find all these kind of levels of it's who's speaking, when they're speaking, how they're speaking, how the people in, I think it would be very contextual whether you were teaching this in Auckland or whether you were teaching it in Palmerston North. So I just think all of that is for juggling. If I may, I'd like to just show you a couple of bits of this documentary, just so that we can move towards some of the ways that we might choose to use drama with this example. What I think is really significant, what is really important about this example is that no one ever would suggest using drama to portray the moment of, hauling some person away, or going into role as a person who'd been staying on the site and trying to speak their thoughts or anything like that. So what we're going to see on the little clips are some of the voices of the real people who were involved, the actual people who were involved. And what we did when we wrote the key was try to think about who we might represent in this history without taking liberties or trying to represent someone who was actually there. And what we ended up with was the idea of someone who had been brought in to take the site down. And I'll explain why that felt right at the time in a minute, but I just thought I'd show you a couple of little clips. So it's just going to be a couple of moments, because in some ways the documentary does the work so beautifully that it's right to use it. So we're going to see in this first little clip that I'm going to play in a second, we're going to see the Hawke family, and Renee Hawke, who was the wife of Joe Hawke, who was one of the main, you're nodding, you're recognizing the name, one of the main people to stand up and lead this protest. And we're going to see her talking about what it was like when they heard that the development was starting, and they just decided to bring the whole family with them. So tell me when you, I'll just do some sharing again. So I'm giving us quite a lot of context because I think it's important for us to think about who we would or wouldn't want to represent for this one. So I'm just going to give us a first little clip, which gives us a bit of a context for what it was like when the occupation started.
There was no notice. It's like, come on, we're going now. Hooked up the trailer, put tents and whatever else we had on. I don't know what the children were thinking. No idea. It was like follow the leader. And it was quite exciting.
Being a young lad of about 11, I wasn't too sure what was going on. But what I can remember is it was summertime in 1976. And the beaches at Okahu and Mission Bay around about that time of the year just filled with people, and it was a really summery sort of time, barbecues and parties. It was that kind of time. After summer had finished and all my friends had gone back home, suddenly the realisation of, oh, that's right, we're here for a purpose, there's a reason why we're here. And as time went on and winter set in, the take of why we were there really sort of hit home.
The occupation took us by surprise.
And this is the Commissioner for Crown Lands. I think this is one of the things the documentary does is give us views from a lot of people involved and let all these voices.
Had no warning of it. And the instructions that came through to me following cabinet consideration of the matter was get them off. Just go and get them off. Simple.
We came back and we were quite excited. There were just half a dozen tents up. And I felt there and then, after time staying with the whānau, with the people, with all our supporters, that it was the right thing to do, to come and live on the point.
So I hope you can see why I wanted to play that, because these are the faces of real people who really lived there, the real families. And I think if we were working with our children, we wouldn't want to go into role as those people. We've got a way to let those people speak and talk to us. So we very much felt that if we were going to use drama with this example, it wouldn't be to walk in the shoes of those people. They've got their stories to tell and they represent themselves. I'm going to play another little extract now from later on in the same section, which shows us the moment of, it goes forward in time to the moment where the police moved in. And what we're going to see here is another person's perspective. It's a police officer of the time, Mata Nuku Ka, his name is, and he's Māori. And he's been brought in. Can you imagine the complexity of his feelings? So when I first saw this documentary, I thought, oh, here's another perspective. But again, I don't think we would invite the children to take on his role, but I think hearing him talk, we start to get something of the multiple voices from the day. So here's Joe Hawke, and then we'll go into...
We just fanned out into a huge circle. We then formed another one closer to the buildings. And so we had an outer perimeter and an inner perimeter.
I also warn every such person to stay off this place. Appropriate action will be taken against every person who fails to obey these warnings.
At the time that this event happened, I didn't know what it was about. But when we actually came in and I stood on this land, looked around, seeing the panorama, it just created a whole lot of feelings within myself of unsureness whether I should have been here. I mean, it took me for a while to realize that these people were hurting. And then to try and understand what that hurting was about, it all affected me.
It seemed like an hour, but it wasn't. It seemed we just did absolutely nothing, never said a word or anything. And that's when one of the most telling things actually happened. And that the protesters, led by the elders, commenced.
Oh, he's frozen. That's the Chief Commissioner of the Police, and he talks about how the protesters, the occupiers, started to sing. And that at that point it felt like something sacred was happening, and he really could feel that this was, he felt a lot of disquiet about his role in it. And so that part of the video got us thinking about that some people who might have been involved at the time and the kind of complicated, disquieted feelings they might have had, and maybe that's our access point for drama. At the end of this video, I'll see if it plays or not.
Finally united a section of our populace.
So this is Joe Hawke. And I have noticed that in this documentary, they don't show very much of the buildings coming down. And I think that's possibly quite deliberate. It's a very painful thing to see that happening. But at the very end here, we're going to see how the buildings start to be taken down.
And we'll never break that bond. That bond will be here forever.
So thank you for watching those little clips. I thought it was quite important to have a sense of some of the images, and there's a whole lot of stories, there's a whole lot of sadness. There was a young child who died during the time that they lived up on the point, and there's a whole story about that, and I hope you'll go and view the documentary later. But if the children have had the opportunity to dip into the story and seen the faces of the people who were there, perhaps a way in for a teacher who wanted to use role, who wanted to use this key, might be to take on the role of one of those who's conflicted, one of those who's been brought in to do this work. And we already got that sense, didn't we, from the police officer there, the young police officer who felt that disquiet. Even the commissioner of police felt that disquiet. I think the journalist at the beginning said, hang on, this feels more like a military occupation than something to... So the feeling when we wrote this key was that perhaps we might take on the role of someone who'd been brought in, let's say from the army, because they did bring in some army people. The protesters have been forcibly removed, peaceful protesters, and they're now dismantling the buildings. And and in the key it says, let's imagine that the actions of one of these people who's demolishing the buildings has been captured by that TV news crew that was there. And the suggestion in the key is that the teacher then says, I'll represent one of the workmen, one of those army workmen, and you watch this film clip and see what happens. Now, I don't know how you feel about that being a way in, but to me, that's quite carefully framed distance. It's not being one of the protesters being dragged off. It's not trying to walk in the shoes of Joe Hawke or speak as him, but it gives us an opportunity to get into this story with a little bit of frame distance. How would it feel if I took that role for a minute and we could just see what that was like? Would that feel okay? Let's give it a go, and if we can talk about it if it doesn't. So what you'd be doing with the children, or you'd be saying, okay, so it's going to be like I'm in that film clip. You saw that grainy footage of the cars coming around the corner and the bulldozer pushing that big building down. And maybe the next thing that happens is they'd put on a hard hat, probably, wouldn't they, like this? And they'd pick up a tool, maybe this big sledgehammer, and they'd swing it. And as we've done with other keys, you'd do that simple action, and you'd invite the children to watch to see what they notice. So let's do that. I'm going to do it again. Because with a film clip, of course, you can replay it. I'm going to replay it again, and I invite you to see what you know.
Can I just interrupt you just for a second? So I'm not 100%, and this may be because I don't quite understand the full context of this. But what you're talking about is that this person here, what you're saying is that they're distanced from the people who are actually involved in the process themselves. And so now we're looking at the perspective of somebody who's been given the job of coming along and then knocking down the temporary homes of the protesters who've been living there for 500 days. But I'm getting the feeling that you're not 100% comfortable with this role and this action. Is that right?
I'm giving it a go. I'm giving it a go.
You keep asking for permission, and I don't understand what the problem is. It feels to me like there's enough distance. But what's the? Do you mind just unpacking that?
No, that's great. I'm quite happy to talk about that. Yeah, when I started tonight thinking about coming on and doing it, it didn't feel like something I wanted to do. But having talked through to this point, it felt like it did feel enough distance, and we haven't got anybody in the room who said, gosh, my auntie was there, or you know, so yeah, I did want to just check that it felt all right. But now that I'm doing it, I'm feeling okay about being him.
Right. Because the importance of the key is that up until this moment, we've been talking about this event, politically and culturally sensitive event from the outside. We've been watching interviews with people, photographs, clips of film. The point of what you're doing now, just to kind of enforce that really, is that you're now bringing into the room with us, as it were, if you were in the class with the kids, the point of view of somebody who was there. Now, of course, it wasn't you, but you are now making that much more immediate than it was up until now. Without the use of this key, we're talking about it.
It'd be still at
now,
that,
yeah, it would still be over there, something that happened to other people long ago, you know, and we're seeing kind of historical film clips and photographs. Now you're making it much more immediate. I just wanted to emphasize that, because that's the point of the key. Is as soon as you stand up and you say to the children, here is someone who was there. Now just watch this bit of film. Now you don't have you kind of commentated as you were doing it, which isn't quite.
I did,
It's
which
slightly
I
different. So you say, watch this piece of film. So now, what did you see there?
Yeah.
It's the film, not you doing the film. It's the person in the film. It's sort of, because they're there then, and you can see just now the point for film, of course, is you can rewind it, and you can look at it again, and you can pause it. That's the point of the film. Sorry, I didn't.
I love what you did, because I can, as I was doing it, I thought, oh, I need to redo that and do it without doing, because I did it in that kind of sort of half in, half out kind of way.
Right.
So that's why I said I need to redo that. And when I was gonna play it very much as you did with that visual information. So yeah, thanks. Yeah, and you did right. You can see the difference, can't you, between the. And I was tentative for a reason, because of the context, and I might well do that very thing with children, but at some point the film needs to arrive. The film needs to arrive as a piece of clean film, and I think you did it for us, Tim. So will you be the film for us? Is that okay?
So imagine that we're team teaching then.
Yeah.
And you said, right, Tim's going to stand up. And when he stands up, he's going to be somebody who was there, not when the protesters were there and not when the police were there, but afterwards, the sort of the hour afterwards.
I'm not sure that's fair on you, because the people are going to interview that character in a minute, and I've done the research and you haven't. So.
Well, that's okay. We can
swap back.
We can use another convention to switch back again. That's perfectly fine.
Oh, then.
That
yeah. So what? So if I'll talk to our children then. So what did you see on this
Do you want me
film?
to do it again?
Yeah,
Do it
let's
again.
replay it.
Okay, so we'll see the clip again.
Yeah. Watching closely. I think talking to you as teachers, I think it works even if we know exactly what the moment is, even if we've had all the context, even if we know exactly what he's doing, I still think this convention is effective. So what did you see? What did you notice?
Hesitation.
Mm.
Some sort of concern and a very distinctive hesitation.
It made me think that he actually wasn't a 20-year-old who was just there as a hired labourer. My thought would be a younger person probably didn't really care much about what was going on, whereas the look you had, Tim, was actually far more serious about what was going on.
You're reminding us, Daphne, that for that kind of concern, you need perhaps a little bit of life experience.
Yeah.
And we're wondering if this is a young one or an older one who maybe has seen some things.
So can I interrupt just for a moment here, because the film clip speaks for itself. So you can't suddenly start talking to me at this point as the person in the film clip, because you're not yet in the fiction. But in a moment, Viv will bring you into the fiction and give you the opportunity to talk to me. However, as Daphne points out, that if you were watching a real film clip, you'd be able to see how old I was. So you're kind of you're in a kind of, oh, I wonder how old he is. Whereas if you were watching the film,
We would know that, wouldn't we?
No. Yeah. So one way I get around this is I say to the students, I say, well, this person here, of course, isn't the real person in the film clip. But if you want to, you can ask them questions about the facts of it. So one of the questions we could say is the person in the film clip a young person, or are they sort of middle-aged? You see, and I would then say, oh, well, they're middle-aged. They're a man, and they're wearing a sort of a high-vis jacket, and obviously they're carrying a sledgehammer and they've got a hard hat on, because you could see that in the film.
Yes, you could. But we've got to have the givens. If it's a film, if we're working with a film, you're right. My response of, oh, we're wondering if it is, we kind of need to settle that. Yeah, thank you. This is great. I'm learning heaps.
But then at this point now, we can now start concentrating on the psychological stuff.
Yeah.
Because you've got at it. So Daphne, you're right. You can bring the assumption with you now of saying, oh, well, that seems to confirm that idea, isn't it? That this isn't somebody who is just sort of turning up for the money, possibly. But we still don't know what their motivations are. Well, I'm going to shut up because I'm the role, and I'm not going to talk about my motivations until you talk to me. So I'll hand back to Viv again. So I'm still sort of.
I think we
could.
I think we could do, and children would do more noticing too, wouldn't they? It was that hesitation. Let's see it again one more time.
It was that lovely moment when obviously the decision was made to swing the sledgehammer. So there was a hesitation, but there was the facial expression changed, and then the hammer swung. I would like to know what was in that thought.
Yeah, because he did it, right? We saw him do it. It was captured on film.
It was almost like he gave in for some reason. It didn't feel good, but he did it anyway.
And that's the point. Thank you. That's it. See how you went round that whole thinking process, because it wasn't, nobody told you. It was just in that. I mean, whatever I was thinking, me being Tim, I was just giving a moment of ambiguity.
Yes.
That's the inquiry, because what happened in my head in that moment, well, you don't know. because you're not inside my head. So, but what, as a human being, you empathise with me. As a human being, you thought to yourself, well, if it were me, that might be what's going through my head. And that's the point of this key, is that we're bringing our heads inside to the heads of somebody. Sorry, Daphne, I can see your guys.
Oh, I'm just saying how that awareness for, I mean, say we're talking from 10 to 12-year-olds, to actually look deeper than the action itself, that hopefully children of this age are beginning to read faces, are beginning to read things like being able to see hesitation or determination or what it. So it's what you're doing with your face is so important as the character, if you call it that, for then getting the depth of reflection from the kids. They're moving past that you are slinging a hammer. It's far more than that. And I just think, gosh, that's so important that kids develop that. Really cool.
And I think it is important that this is a character, Daphne, because I certainly wouldn't feel right about playing that policeman or playing that police commissioner or this is what I mean about, it feels too impertinent to kind of go, well, what made you walk on there then? It's not about trying to understand their psychology. It's more the psychology of humans who are in that situation. And by exploring what might be going on for Tim, we are also exploring what might have been going on in those people's heads on that day. So
there's something else as well that I'd just like to build on what Daphne was saying, that I've done this quite a lot with children, and it's actually very interesting doing it with children, how difficult they find it to read facial expressions.
They do, yeah.
And I actually think it's something that we're never taught. We kind of learn as we live, don't we? Through watching other people and then, interpreting. And one of the fantastic things about this approach is that we can stop and stare. How often do you get the chance to stare at people and then, and then talk about what they're feeling and thinking through their facial expression? We don't get that opportunity. That's not something that's on the school curriculum. And yet I think it is really important. Body language is something that we interact with all the time. If you don't have a vocabulary or you don't have a way of interpreting body language, then it's all a bit of a mystery, isn't it? So this is a great way of looking at body language and saying, what was that? Was that doubt? Was it determination? Was it a sense of resignation? What was it? And it may be all of those things, but we don't normally get the chance to do that, do we? Just stop and stare and then unpack. And I think this is a great way of doing it.
I'm just going to jump in. I don't know if you saw my comment, but my daughter and grandsons rang me from Norway the moment this started, which is why I jumped out. But what I'm just thinking, when I saw what you were covering, I thought, that is so deep and so painful. And I thought, almost like, why something so painful are you dealing with? But that's me with my adult head. Whereas to me, what I'm seeing from the key is actually we don't almost need to know all the story or all the pain. The point is how you're reading, using the key, as you say, people emotion, people thinking. Whereas I wouldn't like to load kids with everything that happened at Best End Point. That was, I was a kid at the time. I was just at college, and I remember being absolutely overwhelmed by it. So, it's about being very careful about how much of the big story you tell. If the point of it is to be able to read emotion, it's almost like you don't need the whole story.
Well, and the point of this key is not what it felt like to be a demolition worker on the day. That's not the point of the story. So I would feel that we hadn't done the history if we stayed with this moment. But to move it forward, this character provides us with a way to invite the children to grapple with some of the parts of the wider story and the greater pain. Because yes, right now we're reading his confusion but what the next step does is to invite the students in to interact with that character, and that character then becomes a portal to the history. Because one of the clever things that DI can do, dramatic inquiry can do, is allow the teacher to take on the role of one who doesn't know and is confused, and then the children are, as it were, commissioned to go find the answers. And that is where, so let's go through the steps and we'll see how it's allowing that research into the wider story. Do you see what I mean, Daphne? So we do both and, I think. And yes, you're right about how much of these stories do we load children with. I feel like this is a secondary key myself. I feel like, no, secondary context. I don't know that I'd be taking children into the specifics of something like Bastion Point at primary, but I do think it's important that it's taught and that we don't shy away from it. So as you've detected from my tentativeness, I think this is continually evolving, but I have found that I personally feel a lot safer here than I thought I was going to when I was thinking about doing tonight. So I think some of the protections are there. So should we have a look at what happens next in the key? So as it stands, we've got this film clip, and so the film clip is imagined, but it's imagined film from the time, and we know enough to, and the teacher has controlled that, so it hasn't got out of control, or it's got the right givens in it. And at the moment, we can't talk to that character because we're here in 2024. But what if we were to imagine that we were the reporters and the film crew who were present that day? That would allow us to talk to him, this workman, and find out his perspective and find out a little bit more about what's going on. Now, I would imagine he's not super keen to talk to the media. But it's our job to talk to them. So if we question him carefully, we might be able to get some information out of him. So how would we go about that? What sort of things would you say to someone to try and get to some of that stuff that might be going on for him in that moment, and even to find out some of the wider context of what's going around? How would we start that if we were those reporters?
Perhaps by just simply asking why he was there and what he'd been asked to do.
Right.
So it's a kind of safe way in.
Start with the practical.
Yeah. Who has brought you here, and what is the job you've been asked to do?
I like the way that kind of protects him a bit too, because it's not like, what are you doing? It's not accusatory, is it? Yeah. So that would be a good question. Hang on to that one, Ev.
Yep.
Is that enough?
I would like to think about a question. No, I'm going to ask you. Would you be able to ask a question like, this person, you hesitated, you didn't just make a second thump. Was it something, trying to get at what might he have seen when he crashed down a part of that wall? What was still in there? Like, there would have been people's possessions, I'm guessing. Or is that kind of like going too heavy even for a senior clerk?
I think that's great. I want to know. I want to know. I think that, and I think there's two things there, Shona. First of all, there's that clever thing you can do in questioning where you say, I noticed you, so you do that noticing first, and then you add a question on. I noticed you hesitated before that second thump. Tell me more about that hesitation. And then there was that second question, which took us right into the moment. What did you see the other side of that wall that you knocked down? Yeah. Those both feel very valid.
Let's just pause there. Just pause there for a second, because what you're doing now is absolutely essential, because the last step brought everybody into a point of view of people who were there at the time. So now everybody has permission or the capability of talking to this person before we didn't. So that's a big shift. However, what you haven't done is go straight into the fiction. There's two good reasons for not doing that. One is that would turn this into a hot seating, and as there is a chance that it might become an interrogation. And we've I'm sure we've all, if you've explored, hot seating and other sort of techniques like this, you can see how that can very quickly, lose kind of focus, really. So you're holding that moment so that you don't. The second thing is that you're talking about the questions and how the questions are going to be phrased. And of course, I'm listening to the questions. So as the person who's going to be answering them, I'm thinking about my answers. That gives me the opportunity to consider what I'm about to be asked, which is really important, because I don't know if you'd just gone straight in and people started asking me questions, I wouldn't have had any time to consider them or think about them.
I think you could even, as a teacher, you could even, if you don't know the answers, you could even kind of hold on to it. So we might have to get that answer, that bit of the interview later, when we've done some finding out. You can kind of hold the film clip that you're going to make in suspension. That's quite
and
cool.
Also you can do that, and the other thing you can do is when Shona said, what did he see, you can say, well, before we ask him, what do you think he saw?
Yeah.
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 And that turns into another inquiry.
The inquiry is so important. The inquiry is almost as important as the drama, isn't it? And we use tiny bits of drama and we do mega wadges of inquiry. Thank you for pointing out to us how this holding before we go in, it's so crucial. For years I used to jump straight into these interactive things and I thought we were meaning making as we went, but so often we do more inquiry if we think before we go in.
Sorry, just the last thing I'm going to say. The person who should be doing the least amount of work is the person in role. The problem with hot seating is it's usually that the person in role is the one who's doing most amount of work, because they're having to invent answers to all this barrage of questions. That's the wrong way around. The students should be the ones that are doing all the work, all the thinking, and the role should be sitting there, with their feet up, really, because that's the way around you want it, obviously, if we're in the classroom.
So with your permission, I'm actually not going to spend a whole lot longer doing this, because I think we've come to the crux of it. But let me just read to you the kinds of things this is what's in the book, the kinds of things that film clip character might say when the journalists talk to them. So what we would do is say, all right, now this time we're going back into the film clip and we're going to see that the next part where the journalists are kind of jostling around this man and they're asking him and remember, and you can do a little bit more signing in as well by saying, well, what's the safety gear those people we would need to be wearing before we went onto the site, so that they can kind of lock into a few bits. And it says here, things like, remember to be careful when we're moving forward to talk to him. This is a place where buildings are being torn apart, so that kind of tempers any tendency for the kids to kind of fling themselves at him. But the invitation with this key is to play one who is really unsure, a real sort of low status role. I hate doing this. I'm following orders from my boss. I'm feeling bad because my mate told me 222 people made this their home, and it doesn't seem right to me. So playing that kind of a character and feeding in little bits of information that are facts from the time, I don't know what to think. Someone said these peoples are squatters, but how can you be a squatter on your own land? So I invite you to think about the difference between playing the character that way and if the teacher had played, say, someone who was really angry at being pulled away from their home. That's a really different power relationship with the journalists, and it also leaves the children very little to find out. What the low status role can do is say, I don't know what's going on here. Can you tell me more? What's caused all this? I don't understand. Why is this land so special to them? All I know is this feels wrong. And so by doing that, they can almost commission the journalists to find out more. Do you see what I mean? So what I think is clever about that role is the positioning and how differently it's not always like that, this key, but one of the ways I invite you to think about it, if you're trying to hold painful history carefully, is to take a role as someone who's conflicted and doesn't understand and needs to understand. And then the children can actually you can pause that, hold that film clip again in suspension and go away and learn, or draw on knowledge that they already have. It depends where in the sequence you use this. You might use it at the very end of a unit when the children are actually loaded with stuff, and then they can answer in the moment, or you might go and use that as a starting point for inquiry. Do you see the difference?
Just to throw a spanner in the works, even that labourer could have had a real racist attitude and had I'm here to get them out, and I'm just wondering how you're careful with probably the perspectives, how you manage if the character and role is actually really antagonistic. And
that's what I'm saying is I think making the choice not to do that is probably more productive in this case. We can talk out of role, we can talk about how people were, or how not everybody would have the sensitivity of this person, but there's something called the grace element in dramatic inquiry where we tend to try to make people complex. If we invite that kind of complexity, I think it stops us playing goodies and baddies, and the children.
So as the person in role,
you can choose.
They're all that, but I'm almost thinking in this circumstances, you actually prep them to be, as you say, the more hesitant.
The teachers. I'm the teacher in role. Tim's the teacher in role. So we've absolutely
you take that. You take the slightly careful role.
This is not a time to ask one of the year sixes to take on the role. No.
I think that's where I'm coming to. It has to be really carefully played.
We're not going for that. Not because there weren't racist people with outrageous attitudes present on that day, but because there's some more nuance and more educational benefit to be gained, and possibly less pain as well to be gained from not playing that one out. And I think the suggestion to play the character that way came from looking at that footage and seeing those conflicted ones in the real story, seeing that police officer, seeing that, and I love the idea of teaching children that that people are complicated, rather than that people are black and white. So it's the teacher that's taking this role. We might have muddied that a little bit by the fact that Tim and I swapped it between us, but so you can pause the story, you can can you imagine inviting the journalists to write the article that came out of that conversation, to go away and explore further? The final step in the key is to actually invite the children to create a voiceover for that part of the footage as well, because there was a voiceover to the real footage. So what would the voiceover say? And that can be a whole exercise of a whole afternoon, because what the voiceover says over the footage can utterly change. And it's really interesting to replay a scene multiple times with different voiceovers over it and see how that utterly changes the story. And I've said here, you can compare their commentaries with those from the time. But as I say, interestingly enough, the original footage of the workman swinging his sledgehammer has actually been taken off that piece of footage that I shared with you at the start. So these things evolve. But yeah, I can't stress that enough. The voiceover part is a whole literacy exercise in itself. It's really interesting. I'm sure you've done similar things, haven't you, Ev, with your literacy? It's a whole other aspect to writing and to presentation. So there we are. There's an attempt to I'm going to say that for me, as you can see, I came into talking to you tonight, not even sure I wanted to do Bastion Point. It didn't feel like the week for it. It didn't feel like my story to tell. It felt a little unsafe and disrespectful. And by the time we got to that point, I had turned that around and I trusted the way the key was written a lot more. That was my experience of tonight. Hopefully there was something useful for you in that, and you can see the ways that, so what are the factors? There's positioning, as in the way that you choose to play a character. There's also the character that you choose, how close they are to the action. And there's that grace element. So not playing them as a goodie, a baddie, but playing that slight sense of tension and conflict and allowing for complexity. So I guess those are the three key features that I wanted to highlight in this one. And then there's all that wonderful drama stuff that Tim emphasized for us about how holding the film clip. It's not really the film clip that makes this key work, is it? It's the moving into it, out of it, layering it. It's the film clip is the least of it in a way, yeah. And if you want to come back in the morning at 6 o'clock and see a totally different take on this key, are we doing your elephant one, Tim?
Yeah, it would be completely different.
Completely different, completely light-hearted.
No politics. No heartache.
Completely creative, just to demonstrate how a key can have a completely different use. So
totally different. It's aimed at young children, little ones. So completely, yeah, absolutely completely different. Yeah.
I'm interested, could you see yourself using that one with that context as teachers? You could have?
I think the lovely thing for me about the key and the use of Bastion Point is that you've shown how you can have a look at what is a really significant historical event without like learning everything about it.
Okay.
And it digs into the feelings and understandings of people at the time. And, you know, because there is no way, as you point out with them altering clips and the way your thinking has changed, there's no way that you can teach Bastion Point and have everybody on the same page at the end. And so I just think that was a really lovely way to have a look at the event and unpack a little bit rather than tackle, because I often see in school they try to get the whole thing.
Okay.
And I think that this pared it down to something that gets at the humanity of it.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
I would probably have a go at it. The thing is, I'm in the far south.
And I would have a go at it in Palmy. If I was trying to take a group of, year 9, 10s into learning about Bastion Point, I would do that. There's something in the documentary where Joe Hawke, he's an amazing guy. he says, I tell my children these stories because there's not just these stories, there's the generations before that were burned out of their houses in that very spot. There's just so much pain going back years. And he says, I tell them my stories because I don't want them to get to school and be told these stories. I want to tell them first. And it really hit me between the eyes. It's like it's different for those up there. You know, it would be different for teachers.
But I can think of situations that we have here that are beginning to be told, and just that are hugely painful, but that would be a lovely way. And like the Māori used to come down through the Waitaki Valley season to season for different reasons. And when the Waitaki Valley, the land was sold, Māori thought they still had the right to pass through. But the people who'd bought the land and established their farms said, no way, Jose, you don't walk through my property. In actual fact, elderly Māori died of starvation because they couldn't get from one food source to the next.
Those stories have to be told, don't
And
they?
they do have to be told. Yeah.
But not through lovely little improvs where one of us will be the farmer or one will, but no.
No. But I thought, so while you were doing Bastion Point, I'm a bit thinking, I wonder how I could get to that, because it happened in more places than that. And that's where I come from. That's my tūranga waiwai. So I hang on to that story. So I'm thinking about I wonder how I could make that work.
Yeah. And there are people,
lovely clips. Kai Tahu have started a big website down here, and there's a whole resource area for teachers. And they've started to collect stories, and you can go in and listen to people.
And I think that's it. Over time, I mean, it's really important to me that I showed you parts of the clips tonight. Over time, stories will be collected, and hopefully in 10 years' time, people won't feel this uncertainty because they'll have had lots of guidance. But in the meantime,
we go.
This is a best possible evolving, attempt to honour those efforts and those times. So thanks everyone. Anybody else wanting to say anything else before I close? Thank you then. I'll just remind you that if you can see this, so the website does include this TV coverage. It also includes a link to the New Zealand on Screen documentary. I really commend that to you. It's a very watchable, but every time I watch it, I get another layer of understanding, and I kind of feel like that would be the way to complete tonight is for you to go and watch that, and hopefully you'll be curious and interested if it's not something you already know about. I definitely commend that one to you. And Ngāti Whātua have their own resources as well. I found the website here, so I'll send you through that link. And it's just important to remember these are real places, real people. And the words that are, there's a wonderful article in I Tangata, remembering Bastion Point, and I loved it because it was voices of the people who were there at the time, talking from now and talking about that past, and that's a wonderful read. And the voices the phrase that I chose to open and that I choose to close with were the final words that somebody used in that article. Ka whawhai tonu mātou, a struggle without end, and that kind of reminds us of the greater, these great big struggles that our land is kind of wresting itself through, and also our important struggles as teachers as we evolve and kind of learn to be authentic and maybe less fearful as we go. I think the more authentic we get to be, the less fearful we get to be. When you go to the book, it gives you guidance on how to plan that key. Obviously, the focus is on characters and location, and you do need to know who your character is going to be and think about things like your positioning and so on. The guidance is all in the book. And Ev's already thinking about contexts that she could explore. And they don't have to be necessarily those complex, rich ones, but that's what we had a go at in the book. And if nothing else, what it's done for me personally is I've now rewatched, engaged with that history more and more deeply, and I think it does that for us as teachers, because we feel like if we're going to take our children there, we need to at least know where we're taking them, a little bit where we're taking them. So that's got to be good. So kia ora, and thank you everyone. Come back and join us in a month's time. Key 12 is called Enact a Film Clip. So it's still using that notion of the little film clip that perhaps we're imagining, but it's got some differences, so come back and find out more. Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you to also Tim, and yeah, great. Always enjoy the way that you help me find what's important in our keys, and I always feel like I learn just as much as anybody else watching. So thank you. We'll stop the recording, and we'll catch up with you all next time. Thanks so much, everyone. Ka kite anō.
Tai rawa atu. I really enjoyed that tonight. That got to me.
Good. I'm so glad. Thank you. Thanks, everyone.